Hello Philosophy 1150 students. We're on to our last video where we're going to consider a number of proofs in relational predicate logic. We've got our same 20 rules of sentential logic. We've got the same 5 new rules in quantifier logic. The only thing that's new with relational predicate logic is that when we make sure to match up the individual simple sentences, it's a little bit more complicated situation. So with sentential logic, we just had to make sure that capital letters matched each other in making inferences. With predicate logic, we have to focus on the subject of the sentence, always a single subject. With relational predicate logic, there can be 2 or more subjects, so you just have to pay a little closer attention to everything. You have to have a mind for details. So it's a good practice for that. We'll start off with a nice, easy situation. This is the first question in assignment 14, which in English reads as follows. Ormazd is morally superior to Ahriman. That's our first premise. So we've got the two-place relation S, X, Y. X is morally superior to Y. Then the second premise, for all X, for all Y, if X is morally superior to Y, then Y is not morally superior to X. Hence, Ahriman is not morally superior to Ormazd. So the inference itself is very simple. It's just going to give us our first situation where we are doing multiple quantifier removals. So these are our 2 premises. In order to derive the conclusion, we have to dequantify the second premise, and we want to dequantify that second premise in a way that we can make use of the information we have in our first premise, and also that we can gear it towards deriving the assigned conclusion. So, as I said, this example is nice and simple. We've got SXA, and our first premise has Ormazd in the innermost slot, Ahriman in the outermost slot. Then we've got tilde, SYX, and Ormazd is in the outermost slot of the conclusion. Notice the X. Ahriman is in the innermost slot, and we've got the tilde. So that tells us that when we take off the universal quantifier with the bound X variable, we want to put Ormazd's name in there. When we take off the universal quantifier with the Y-bound variable, we want to put Ahriman's name in those 2 slots. So when you do dequantifications of lines that have multiple quantifiers, it's always one quantifier at once. So in other words, one quantifier with a particular bound variable and all of the instances of that same bound variable in the sentence. So 2UI is going to be all Y are such, so we're removing the leftmost quantifier bound variable pair, the universal with the X. That's going to give us S blank, where the X was, Y, horseshoe, tilde, S, Y, blank. And if you recall, we decided we need to put Ormazd's name in those 2 slots. Now that we've completed that, the universal quantifier with the Y-bound variable is in the outermost or leftmost position. in line 3, now that the universal quantifier with the x-bound variable is gone. So you're not eligible to remove the universal quantifier with the y-bound variable because there's information in the line that comes before it. So it doesn't range over the entire line. Remember me emphasizing that earlier. With all of the quantifier rules, you can only take off quantifiers, and we'll see a little bit later, or put on quantifiers on entire lines. Another way of looking at it, taking off quantifiers, putting on quantifiers, always has to be done in the leftmost or the first position in the line. So the universal with the y-bound variable in line 2 isn't in the leftmost position, so it's not eligible to be removed. But in line 3, it is now in the leftmost position. So we do the second UI on line 3, and this time, this set of brackets to indicate that the quantifier ranges over the conditional gets removed as well. We didn't remove it in the first UI because it was still needed to indicate that the universal quantifier with the y-bound variable ranges over the conditional. So that's going to give us S-O blank horseshoe tilde S blank O. And if you recall, we decided it would be to our advantage to put Offramon's name in that slot. So now that we've done those two quantifier removal steps, one for modus ponens gives us, it's not the case that Offramon is morally superior to Armazd. So that's our first proof in relational predicate logic. We'll start off nice and simple. Now we'll move on to consider another question where keeping track of what letters we put in which slots will become just a little more complicated. Now we'll consider question 4 from assignment 14. The first premise in English says, any rational animal is of greater intrinsic value, or I would have said has greater intrinsic value, than any non-rational animal. So I've symbolized it, all x are such that if x is rational and an animal, then all y are such that if y is not rational and an animal, then x has greater intrinsic value than y. So that's a little bit of an unwieldy premise there, but we will manage. The second premise is a lot shorter. Karen is a rational animal, but she is not of greater intrinsic value than George. So here we've got lowercase k for Karen, lowercase g for George. Karen is rational and Karen is an animal, and it's not the case that Karen is of greater intrinsic value than George. Finally, we have our conclusion down at the bottom. So, if George is an animal, then he is rational. I'll give you just a few seconds. Have a look at the X's and Y's as well as the names Karen and George. See if you can figure out which name should go in the slot for the X variable, which name should go in the slot for the Y variable. In this situation, we've got Karen's name as a rational being and as an animal, so that nicely matches here, although it's kind of close to this one over here. The real key for getting the right slot placements is we've got tilde GKG, where Karen's name is in the innermost slot, George's name is in the outermost slot. And we've got another instance, GXY, of that same two-place relation, not negated this time. So that tells us if we put Karen's name in the innermost slot here, it'll go with these two slots, matching them. So we're going to put Karen's name in the 3X slots when we do the first UI on line 1. So 1 UI. This time, the universal quantifier with the bound x variable will be removed, as well as this set of square brackets, the outermost set. All of the rest of the brackets are necessary either to preserve binary form in the sentence or to indicate what the universal quantifier with the y-bound variable ranges over. So, Karen's name goes in the 3x slots. If Karen is rational and Karen is an animal, then all y are such that if y is not rational and y is an animal, then, don't forget this one, Karen has greater intrinsic value than y. So there's 1 UI. Notice now the universal quantifier with the y-bound variable, it was never eligible to be dequantified because it was just ranging over the consequent of the entire conditional, which was a smaller conditional itself. I think you can see pretty clearly, though, that we can get the consequent of this conditional in line 3 by itself, so that we will then be in a position to dequantify the universal quantifier with the y-bound variable. And the way we do that is that we simplify the left conjunct on 4 RK and AK. Here, we could do it later. We're going to have to do it at some point. I'll just do it now. I'll do the second simplification. So, to simp. Now, 3, 4 modus ponens will give us all y are such that if y is not rational and y is an animal, then Karen has greater intrinsic value than y. So that's 3, 4 modus ponens. Now we do the second UI because the universal quantifier with the y-bound variable is ranging over the entire sentence. So that's going to give us, if George is not rational and George is an animal, then Karen has greater intrinsic value than George. So that's 6 UI. Now, of course, 5, 7 modus tollens will give us, it's not the case that if George isn't rational, it's not the case that George isn't rational and George is an animal. That follows from the combination of the conditional and the negation of the consequent. 5, 7 modus tollens. Now we do eight De Morgans. From here, there's 2 or 3 ways of doing it. As long as you've got a correct sequence of steps that end up with our assigned conclusion, I'm going to do it this way. Nine implication, where the left disjunct sheds one of the tildes, but it keeps the other one, so that, and here's our assigned conclusion, it's just tan contra, going from the right to the left, where we have tilde Q horseshoe tilde P, and we make it into P horseshoe Q. So things are a little more complicated here, but still manageable. So there's a number of questions in assignment 14 I suggest you do. It's a situation, once you get used to there being multiple letters and this process of keeping track of things, the more familiar you are with it, the easier it'll be to keep track of everything. So we don't want to go too quickly into the more complicated stuff, or you'll be making it harder on yourself than it really needs to be. We move on to question 7, which is an interesting little argument. One premise, all horses are animals. From that, they conclude every tail of a horse is a tail of an animal. And we've seen this before in the symbolization. There isn't a one-place predicate tx, x is a tail. We've just got the one-place relation hx, x is a horse, and the two-place relation txy, x is a tail of y, where the tail goes in the innermost slot and the kind of animal having that tail, or the kind of entity, goes in the outermost slot. So I've symbolized the assigned conclusion as all x and all y are such that if y is a horse and x is the tail of y, then y is an animal and x is the tail of y. And we've only got this one premise, all x are such that if x is a horse, then x is an animal. So how do we proceed with this one? With this example, my suggestion is we start with some backwards planning. This is the first time that we've got double requantification on the end. So we've started off learning how to do multiple dequantification or quantifier removals, but this one gives us a test in multiple quantifier application. So we can put our assigned conclusion at the very bottom. I'll put it over here. All x and all y are such that if y is a horse and x is the tail of y, then y is an animal and x is the tail of y. Now, if you recall, quantifiers can only be taken off or be put on in the leftmost or outermost position in the line. So what does that mean as far as the requantification that got us to this sentence? Well, we could answer that question by asking ourselves, well, what would the second last sentence in the proof have to look like? Well, it would have to look like this. All y are such that if y is a horse and t blank, because the x isn't there yet, y, then y is an animal and t blank y. Still need that set of square brackets because even though there's no universal quantifier with an x-bound variable, the universal quantifier with the y-bound variable needs them. Well, in order to get that universal quantifier with the x-bound variable, we're going to have to do a UG, so that tells us immediately it's going to have to be a free variable. This is the rule with restrictions, remember. So we're also going to have to make sure that that free variable didn't come into the proof in a way that makes the UG ineligible. But at this point we can know for sure that it's going to be a free variable, so we'll put v there. Now, and this is the opposite of the dequantification situation, before the last step where the universal quantifier with the x-bound variable goes on to the sentence, we're in this situation. So when the universal quantifier with the y-bound variable goes on to the sentence in the second last step of the proof, it is in the leftmost position and it does apply over the entire sentence. So we've correctly used the quantifier application rule. Then when the universal quantifier with the bound x variable goes on the sentence, the universal quantifier with the y-bound variable no longer ranges over the entire sentence, but, the important point, it's already there and it did range over the entire sentence when it was placed on the sentence. So, how are we going to get the universal quantifier with the y-bound variable? Answer, by another UG. So it's the last two steps of the proof are both going to be UG. UG for this one, and then a second UG for this one. Since we've got v in that slot, we'll use a different free variable, w, for the one that's going to have a UG done upon it, where it's assigned a universal quantifier with the y-bound variable. So in other words, what we're going to need is the following. If we can just get the conditional unspecified w is a horse and unspecified v is the tail of unspecified w. If that, then unspecified w is an animal and unspecified v is the tail of unspecified w. Just get that conditional, do this UI, then do the second UI. Alright, how are we going to get that conditional? We could get it through strategic addition steps, but why not use the CP here? In other words, we provisionally assume the antecedent of the conditional we want as the third last line of the proof. We provisionally assume that unspecified w is a horse and that unspecified v is the tail of unspecified w. So that's a provisional assumption. Now all we have to do is derive the consequent of the conditional. So we're going to get the third last sentence of the proof by CP, second last sentence of the proof by a UG on the conditional we got by CP, and we're going to get the last line of the proof by another UG. Now that we've got unspecified W in this slot, unspecified W is a horse, that tells us what replacement we want to make when we do the UI in 1. UI is without restrictions, of course. So we could have done the UI before we made the provisional assumption. Although if we make the provisional assumption first, it makes it crystal clear exactly what instantiation we want to make when we do the UI on one. So that'll give us HW, horseshoe, AW. Now, I hope you'll agree, the sentential logic part of this, pretty straightforward. We do the two simplifications, now 3, 4 modus ponens. Finally, five, 6 conjunction will give us AW and TVW, so that in line 8, 2 to 7, CP is going to give us HW and TVW, horseshoe, AW and TVW. Didn't need that to stick out quite that far. There we have our conditional. Now, as we planned, we do the first UG. This is going to be the UG involving the y-bound variable. Very quickly though, we might want to review. We're going to be replacing the two instances of, we're going to be replacing the 4 instances of W with Y, and then we're going to be replacing the 2 instances of V with X. Both W and V were a provisional assumption in our subproof. That made both of them ineligible for UGs until we've exited the subproof, which we have. So we're now eligible to do the UGs. No EIs to worry about, so everything is the way that it should be. So line 9. All Y are such that, and then we're going to need square brackets to indicate that the universal quantifier in y-bound variable ranges over the entire conditional in the square brackets. H, Y, and T, V, Y, horseshoe, A, Y, and T, V, Y. So that's 8 UG. That's a perfectly valid inference to make. There's nothing special about using unspecified W. We could have used any free variable there to get that inference. We're not smuggling in information we're not entitled to. Now that we've done the first UG that ranged over the entire sentence, we can do the second UG using the different bound variable X. All X and all Y are such that HY and TX Y, horseshoe, AY and TX Y. And again, the square brackets, which were already necessary to indicate that the universal with the y-bound variable ranges over the entire conditional. So that's 9 UG. So This is very doable, but you do have to be systematic. Don't get overwhelmed by the noise, and probably, since this was the first time we did a proof like this, it was helpful to backwards plan on a separate sheet how things were going to end up, and then everything proceeds forward smoothly. Okay. Now we'll wrap up the complexity a little bit more. This particular question isn't in one of the assignments, but I thought it would be a good question in terms of, it's a little bit more complex, but it's not the most complex kind of question. Here's the situation. We've got a one-place predicate, fx, x is female. Then we've got three two-place relations. dxy, x is the daughter of y, mxy, x is the mother of y, and pxy, x is the parent of y. Keep in mind that x's and y's here are just indicating slot position. So whatever goes in the innermost slot is the daughter of whatever goes in the outermost slot. Whatever goes in the innermost slot is the mother of whatever goes in the outermost slot. Whatever goes in the innermost slot is the parent of whatever goes in the outermost slot. So, consider the following two premises. All x and all y are such that if x is the daughter of y, then x is female and y is the parent of x. That makes perfect sense, right? How could you question that? Second premise, all x and all y are such that if x is the parent of y and x isn't female, then x is not the mother of y. Again, perfectly commonsensical, I would claim. The conclusion, all x and all y are such that if x is the daughter of y and y is the mother of x, then x is female and y is female. That also seems obviously true. It probably, though, and this is the important logical point, doesn't seem all that obvious that the truth of the two premises necessitates, the truth of the conclusion. We can construct a proof to that effect, though. So how do we proceed? Here, we're starting to get into a fair bit of detail. Again, don't panic, just proceed systematically. Once again, I would suggest we start the proof by planning how it's going to end. So once again, we've got this situation where we've got a doubly quantified conditional. So, as in the last proof, the very last step of the proof is going to be a UG that's going to put on the x-bound variable in the leftmost position. The second last step of the proof is going to be a UG that puts on the universal quantifier with the y-bound variable. So, what's the second last line of the proof going to look like? It's going to be all y are such that if x, here we want to start filling in the x, right? So, since it's going to be a UG, let's pick a free variable. Let's pick v. So all y are such that if unspecified v is the daughter of y and y is the mother of unspecified v, then unspecified v is a female and y is a female. And the sentence we'd need to get that by UG would be if unspecified V is the daughter of unspecified W and unspecified W is the mother of unspecified V, then unspecified V is a female and unspecified W is a female. Once again, the easiest way to get that would be by CP. So, this gives us a significant advantage. We've made some significant headway as far as specifying which letters should go in which slots. We now know that with the two-place X is the daughter of Y relation, we want V in the innermost slot, W in the outermost slot. With the mother relation, we want W in the innermost slot, V in the outermost slot. And as we're going to see, those specifications are going to determine what needs to go in the other slots. So we can now do a succession of 4 UIs. So we can start with line 1. We will go 1 UI. So we're taking off the outermost quantifier with the bound X variable. So bound X variable. So all Y are such that D XY. What we're interested in though is what free variable goes in the innermost slot. And our provisional assumption tells us it's unspecified V. So dVy horseshoe FV and P, notice how it is YX. So that tells us that unspecified V goes in the outermost slot. And in a way it makes sense. If unspecified V is the daughter of Y, then Y would be the parent of V. Now we do the next. We could have done the UIs on line 2, or we can proceed with the second UI on line 3, which I'm going to do. And this time I'm going to want W in the 2 Y slots, and the square brackets will no longer be necessary. So that'll give us dVW. If that, then FV and PWV. So that's 3 UI. If unspecified V is the daughter of unspecified W, then unspecified V is a female and unspecified W is the parent of unspecified V. That makes sense. Then we'll do 2 more UIs. 2 UI. All Y are such that, okay, PXY, we know from here that W has to go in that innermost slot. That's the important thing. So, and in line 2, the bound X variable is in the innermost slot. Therefore, W goes in all places where the bound X variable goes. PWY and tilde FW, horseshoe tilde MWY. All Y are such that if W, unspecified W is the parent of Y, and unspecified W is not female, then unspecified W is not the mother of Y. So all makes perfect intuitive sense. Finally, 5 UI will give us, if unspecified W is the parent of unspecified V, and it's not the case that unspecified W is female, then it's not the case that unspecified W is the mother of unspecified V. So we've done the 4 dequantifications, but, and this is key, the reason we knew how to do it in a way that's going to give us the solution we want is because of the backwards planning. One other difference you'll notice, in the last proof I did the provisional assumption first. In this one I did the dequantifications first. Since UI is unrestricted, it either way is perfectly fine. Now that we've done the dequantifications, doing them in accordance with the subproof we're about to construct, everything should go smoothly. So once again, until you've done a fair number of these proofs, probably be a little bit tough to plan all that out from the top down. So you don't want to be doing that. You want to be doing it from the bottom up. Why do something in a way that makes it harder for you instead of in a way that makes it easier for you? So our provisional assumption is if unspecified V is the daughter of unspecified W and unspecified W is the mother of unspecified V. So that's our provisional assumption. All we have to do is derive the consequent. Unspecified V is female and unspecified W is female. And we've planned out how things are going to end in the way that they need to end. So really, we're down to a situation where we just need to carry out the appropriate sequence of sentential logic steps on lines 6, 4, 6, and 7. So the first thing to do couple of simplifications. Now, 4, 8 modus ponens will give us at this point, we could do 2 simplifications in a row. It might not be clear to you whether we need both of these. So we can always do the simplifications later. You might have noticed as well, 6 has got tilde MWV as the consequent. So we do a double negation on 9 so that we're set up for the modus tollens. 6, 11. Modus tollens is going to give us tilde PWV and tilde FW. 12 is just calling for a De Morgan's to give us tilde PWV or tilde FW. So that's 12 De Morgan's. And at this point I'll just pause to neaten up the right disjunct, doing a double negation on part of the line. Now we can see that we're going to need these two. Remember, what are we after in our subproof? The conjunction of FV and FW. So still in the subproof. So, line 10 will do 2 simplifications. Perhaps you did them earlier if you were doing this proof on your own as you were watching. Tan-sim. Here we'll do a double negation to set up for the disjunctive syllogism. So 16 double negation, 14, 17 disjunctive syllogism, gives us FW. So finally, line 19, FV and FW, that's just 15, 18. Conj, and that ends our subproof, so that got a little bit of an unsightly gap, but line 20 is 7 to 19 CP. And then, as planned, 21 is the first of our UGs involving unspecified W, which occurs in 3 places. We've already exited the subproof where both V and W were provisional assumptions, so we haven't violated the UG restriction. 20 UG, then we do 21 UG on line 22. So, in that way, we've dealt with some fairly complex information in an organized way. We made it easy on ourselves by doing strategic backwards planning, and everything sets up nicely. Now we move on to question 12 in assignment 14. First I'll read the argument in English. Every physical event has a physical cause. Every brain event is a physical event. If any brain event has a physical cause, then it lacks a mental cause. It follows that no brain event has a mental cause. And here's the symbolization I've given for this question. All X are such that if X is an event and X is physical, then there exists a Y such that Y is physical and Y causes X. Every physical event has a physical cause. Notice we've got the one-place predicate PX, X is physical, and EX, X is an event, but we don't have a one-place predicate CX, X is a cause. Instead, we've got the two-place relation CXY, X causes Y. Second premise, all X are such that if X is an event and X occurs in the brain, then X is an event and X is physical. That's going to symbolize every brain event is a physical event. This third premise is the tricky one symbolically. It's not so much that it's tricky, it's just long. All X are such that if X is an event and X occurs in the brain, and there exists a Y such that Y is physical and Y causes X, then it's not the case that there exists a Z such that Z is mental and Z causes X. That's the symbolization for the English sentence. If any brain event has a physical cause, then it lacks a mental cause. The conclusion up here, it's not the case that there exists an X, such that X is an event and X occurs in the brain, and there exists a Y, such that Y is mental and Y causes X. No brain event has a mental cause. So, how do we proceed with this one? Let's do things a little bit differently this time. And instead of doing a CP, let's do an IP. So, our conclusion is a negated existentially quantified sentence. So, we'll start off with the provisional assumption that this sentence is false. So, in other words, that there is at least one X such that X is an event and X occurs in the brain and there exists a Y such that Y is mental and Y causes X. So, that's going to be our provisional assumption. Now, if we can just derive a standard contradiction, we will have proven that the assigned conclusion is correct. All right. Now, if you recall, EI is the dequantifying rule with restrictions, whereas UI is the quantifying rule without restrictions. So, if you're in a situation where there are or is an EI to be done, you need to do it first, otherwise you're not going to be able to match the relations in the subject sentence in the way that you need to. So, there are no free variables in the proof yet, so when we do the EI, as long as we put a free variable in the 1, 2, 3 X slots that match the existential quantifier with the bound X variable that we're removing, we will have complied with the EI restrictions. So that's going to give us unspecified V is an event, and unspecified V occurs in the brain, and there's at least one Y such that Y is mental and Y causes V. So that's going to be 4 EI. So the square brackets were there to indicate that the existential quantifier ranges over the entire sentence. So once they're removed, the square brackets and the existential quantifier and the bound X variable all go together. All right, now we know that we're going to use unspecified V to stand for anything that's an event and occurs in the brain. So, if we look at line 2, we can do a UI there in a way where we're going to match the subject in the 5th line. So that's going to be 2 UI. So that's going to give us, if unspecified V is an event and unspecified V occurs in the brain, then unspecified V is an event and unspecified V is physical. Now, if we look up at the first premise, it's got that slightly different configuration. X is an event and X is physical. So, once again, we'll put V in the X slot when we do the second UI on line 1. So that's going to give us if unspecified V is an event and V is physical, then there's at least one Y such that Y is physical and Y causes, and once again we have unspecified V. Now finally we look at line 3. Here we've got X is an event and X is in the brain. So that tells us once again we want to put unspecified V in the slot when we remove the universal quantifier and bound X variable. And once we remove that, this very outer set of square brackets will be removed. So this is going to give us there exists a V such that V is an event and V occurs in the brain, or sorry, if V is an event and V occurs in the brain, and there exists a Y such that Y is physical and Y causes, there's the X again, V. So all of that together is the antecedent of a conditional, and the consequent is then it's not the case that there exists a Z such that Z is mental and Z causes one more occurrence of V. So that's going to be 3 UI. Now we're in a position where we can combine some of the information that we have. 6, 7 hypothetical syllogism will give us if unspecified V is an event and unspecified V occurs in the brain, then there's at least one Y such that Y is physical and Y causes V. So that is 6, 7 hypothetical syllogism. Now, and we could have done this before we did the hypothetical syllogism, a couple of simplification steps. So that's going to give us unspecified V is an event and unspecified V occurs in the brain. The second simplification, there's at least one Y such that Y is mental and Y causes V. So that's going to be 5 simp simp. Now, we can end off this column here by doing one last modus ponens on lines 9 and 10, and that'll give us there's at least one Y such that Y is physical and Y causes V. Now, we can continue over on this board. We're still in the subproof. What we want to do now is focus on line 8, that long conditional. In lines 10 and 12, we have the ingredients that will give us the antecedent. So, 10, 12 conj will give us, if unspecified V is an event and unspecified V occurs in the brain, sorry, not if, unspecified V is an event and occurs in the brain, and there exists a Y such that Y is physical and Y causes V. Now, and this will clear up the long sentence finally, 8, 13 modus ponens will give us, it's not the case that there exists a Z such that Z is mental and Z causes V. So, we're looking for a standard contradiction. Do you see the possibilities for the standard contradiction yet? Have a look at line 11. Line 11 says there's at least one Y such that Y is mental and Y causes V. Line 14 says it's not the case that there exists a Z such that Z is mental and Z causes V. So, if we could somehow change the bound variable in one of these sentences, this one from Y to Z or that one from Z to Y, then we would have the makings of a standard contradiction. And we can in fact do that. And notice we can't dequantify this guy before we do a QN, but we can dequantify line 11. So the next step then would be 11 EI. Keep in mind though that EI is a rule with restrictions. So when we look back earlier in the proof, we see that an EI has already been done on line 5 involving unspecified V. We don't want to be smuggling information regarding V that we're not entitled to. So the second EI on line 11 has to be done with another free variable, unspecified W. So that'll give us unspecified W is mental and unspecified W causes V. Now, you might wonder, well, hold it here. Isn't there an unspecified V in this EI? Doesn't that go against the restriction? The answer here is no, because this unspecified V didn't come into the proof as a result of the second EI. Rather, that unspecified V came into the proof as a result of the UI on line 3. So when we did the EI and removed the two occurrences of the bound Y variable, that V was already there. So that doesn't run afoul of the restriction on EI against using V. Okay, so now that we've got this line, we just do 15 EG. And EG is unrestricted, remember. When we do the EG, though, we don't want to go back to our original line 11, existential quantifier, and the bound Y variable. Instead, we will use the bound Z variable. So, if there's at least one Y such that Y is mental and Y causes V, then by EI, it follows that unspecified W is mental and unspecified W causes V. Then when we proceed on line 16 to an EG, if it is indeed true that unspecified W is mental and unspecified W causes V, then there's at least one Z, unspecified W, such that unspecified that Z is mental and that Z causes V. So, line 17 then, and look, it just happens to occur right where this unwieldy line sticks out. We'll still be all right then. So line 17 is going to be 14, 16 conj. There's at least one Z such that Z is mental and Z causes V. And it's not the case. There's at least one Z such that Z is mental and Z causes V. That's a standard contradiction. We've got an existentially quantified conjunction, and that exact same existentially quantified conjunction as the other conjunct with a tilde in front of it. So we are justified in concluding then, I'm going to put this down here, for to 17 IP. It's not the case that there exists an X such that X is an event and X occurs in the brain, and there exists a Y such that Y is mental and Y causes X. So even though there's quite a bit of noise, so to speak, going on here, as long as you are consistent and you pay close attention to what free variables have gone into one slot, taking care to ensure that they match, even proofs like this are very doable. One last thing I should say though, as you're going through this last video, you might want to watch it proof by proof and pause to do some of the exercise questions so that you come to internalize this process, become a little more familiar with it. So this is going to end our consideration of various proofs. As I'm going to be indicating in the email, the exam then is again as specified in the syllabus, because technically this is a registrar scheduled final exam, so it has to be when indicated in the syllabus. But like the third take-home exam, you're going to have from 10 a.m. when you receive the exam until 1 p.m. to return it in the Moodle homepage. I've spoken to the people in IT and they assure me that whatever problems might have existed earlier won't exist this time. If you have any questions or comments, email me and we will get together. Otherwise, good luck on the fourth exam.